Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome to Game Week 1 Championship previews. We're going to go through every single match that is going to occur on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday for the first week of the Championship. We're going to do this for every single game week, whether that be midweek or just weekend games. We're going to do all of it, so make sure you've hit that subscribe button and turn on that notification bell to stay tuned for when the next one drops. But this time, we're going to get straight into it. We're going to be looking at every single fixture. We're going to start off with Blackburn and Derby County, which happens on Friday night. But shall we now get straight into it? So, Derby County make their return to the Championship this weekend. They're playing against Blackburn Rovers at Ewood Park. It's an 8 o'clock kickoff on Sky Sports Football. It is going to be a very, very interesting one. Now, Derby County haven't yet completed their business for the summer, as most teams haven't either. I believe Blackburn Rovers still have hold of Sammy Schmodics, but is he going to play on Friday? I personally don't think so. Now, if we're looking ahead to this fixture, I am going to do a full match preview, looking in depth at Derby County over the next few days, so make sure you've hit that subscribe button to stay tuned to that. But we've got to look at the recent results throughout pre-season. Now, if you do look at Blackburn Rovers, 2 draws, 3 wins. If you look at Derby County, I actually think that third win, Leicester City, was the back end of last season. So if we go 2 wins, 2 draws, and then we look at Derby County, now they've only won 2 games this pre-season. They beat Matlock Town. 3 games. Beat Matlock, Stockport and Real Valladolid. But in the other games, they played Barnsley, Chesterfield and Shrewsbury. And Derby have shown some defensive lapses over the course of the last few weeks. In pre-season, obviously, hopefully, for Derby County fans like myself, that'll all be rectified heading into the first game of the season. But you look at Blackburn, they've been actually quite, I'm not going to say defensively solid, but a lot more solid than Derby. When you look at, they've only conceded in 3 of the 4 friendlies listed by Footmob. They've won 2, drew 2. They've not lost. Now, they may have lost in other friendlies that aren't listed here, but I'm only going to talk about what I can see and what I know. Now, obviously, it's going to be a very interesting season for both of these two sides. I believe both sides are going to be battling at the bottom end of the table. I think it's one of those where you look at Blackburn Rovers and you think they've lost a lot of quality. They've got a lot of problems higher up as well. And it's going to just be really, really interesting to see how, obviously, their squad develops over the course of the back end of the transfer window. Obviously, the transfer window ends within the first international break, I believe. So it's one of those where some of these squads aren't going to be settled, aren't going to be set in stone until that final week. So it's like, I know for a fact Derby County aren't going to be set in stone until then. We're still lacking a goalkeeper, still need a creative midfielder, a centre-half and a striker. So it's one of those where every club is still going to be looking to improve, and Blackburn Rovers certainly go on that list as well. Now, if we do just sort of take a quick look at Blackburn Rovers, now I have done a full league preview of every single squad in the Championship. We looked at the managers, we looked at the transfers that they'd made as that date occurred, and if we do look at the squad of Blackburn Rovers, it's a very interesting one. Obviously, you've got some like fairly decent players throughout this squad, and obviously the main one to note is Sammy Schmodics. Now, I personally don't think he's going to play. I don't think he'll want to play. Obviously, there's rumours of a move to Ipswich Town. There's been rumours of a move to Everton. Like, there's all sorts of talks going on about him. But they've got players like John Buckley and Lewis Travis, 2 players who I believe are very, very good Championship midfielders. If you then look at their forwards, they've brought in Andreas Weimann during this off-season. They've still got Tyrese Dolan. So they do have some good players who can sort of make things happen in this division. Now, the big question for me is going to be, are they able to put it all together without Sammy Schmodics? Because they struggled to do that last season, and that's going to be the big question for Blackburn Rovers this season. And then if we do take a look onto Derby County, they've obviously lost some really, really big names this off-season, with Joe Wildsmith leaving on a free transfer. Max Bird has joined Bristol City. They've lost 2 big midfield players in Conor Horahan and Corey Smith. Now, Conor Horahan dropped off towards the back end of last season and wasn't necessarily a first-team player. He was in and around the squad, don't get me wrong, but he was not a starter or anything like that. and you've got Corey Smith, who was a starter. They've completely shaped up their midfield. Now, if we look at the squads of Derby County, we're going to see a big area where they are lacking straight away, and that is the goalkeeper department. Now, at the moment, Derby County only have Josh Vickers in between the sticks, and that is a problem. He's the only senior goalkeeper at the club. I believe Jack Thompson is headed out on loan to Kettering Town. You look at the defenders, they're still missing a few bodies in there. You look in midfield and it's completely new and improved from last season. David Ozu's come in, Ibu Adams, Ben Osborne, Kenzo Goldmine have all come in to join that attacking midfield and defensive midfield areas for Derby County. They've kept hold of Tyrese Forner and Liam Thompson, but there's still bodies to improve. Now, that attacking area is wrong. Martin Waghorn no longer plays for Derby County, but we still need a number 9. James Collins, Connor Washington and Jerry Yates are a number 9. Yates can't play for the first 3 games, but the other 2 are sort of hit and miss. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one does develop. Let me know your score predictions down in the comments. Earlier this week, I'll have released my August preview for Derby County, and I predicted that this game, I believe I said it would be a 1-1 draw, but you let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. Next up, we're taking a look at Preston North End versus Sheffield United at Deepdale. Another 8 o'clock kickoff on Friday night. It's going to be a very interesting this one. Two sides who I'm not really sure where I think they're going to be. I've obviously done my championship preview and predictions over the last week. So if you do want to go and check that out, make sure you do. We're very interested to see where these two sides end up. Obviously, Preston North End have sort of been a team around the playoffs, but sort of always ended up mid-table. So it's going to be interesting to see where they end up. Obviously, Sheffield United have come down and had some ownership issues, but is that resolved now? Is it not? How is it going to end up for Sheffield United? Now, they have lost a big player in Jayden Bogle, who was good for them in the Premier League. He's gone to Leeds United. Preston North End are obviously still looking for signings as well. Now, if we do look at both teams' pre-seasons, now, I think Sheffield United's game against Tottenham was in the Premier League, so we ignore that one. They've gone 3 wins and 1 draw with Huddersfield Town. They've beat Rotherham and Harrogate as well as Chesterfield, whereas Preston North End have lost to Southport, beat Bamber Bridge, beat Fiorentina, beat Salford and then lost 3-0 to Everton. Now, the big question here is I think that Preston North End normally punch above their weight in terms of their budget, but I also think that the fans and some people in the championship space probably expect a bit more from them, and I certainly think that they've been in and around it so often, at some point they've got to get in, but I don't quite know if that's going to be this season. Sheffield United, on the other hand, with their off-field issues and some of the players they've lost, it's going to be really interesting to sort of see how they get started this season. Obviously, they have brought in some good players like Harrison Burrows from Peterborough. He's going to be a really interesting signing at Championship level. Had a massive attacking output for Darren Ferguson in League One. So it's going to be interesting to see how he fits and plays into this Chris Wilder system at Sheffield United. Obviously, both teams have some really, really good players who could certainly make a difference in the Championship. But the big question is really going to be which team is going to come out on top. Now, I personally think that if we do go ahead and look at Preston North End's squad as it loads up, like, there's a few things that I think that they're missing. They've got some players in here that I personally think maybe aren't quite Championship level anymore, and obviously, like, your fans at Preston may disagree with me, but we obviously are moving forward to look at a player called Dwayne Holmes. Now, Dwayne Holmes was at Derby and I really liked him for about 18 months. And then all of a sudden, form changed, the atmosphere changed, and then he ended up moving to Huddersfield. Now, is he good? Yeah. Do I think he's a Championship player who's going to help you get the playoffs? Maybe not at this point. Now, I do have to bring up Stefan Thordarson, that Preston North End have bought in this season, a player which Derby County were interested in. I believe he's gone to Preston for a fee in the region of around £850,000, and he looks to be a tremendous signing for Preston North End. It's going to be interesting to see how he fits in with their squad over the course of the season. Obviously, having to move from Iceland is never going to be an easy situation. If you look in their forward line, they've obviously got Emil Rees-Jacobsen, Ched Evans, Will Keane, Sam Greenwood, a player they've bought in from Leeds United. It's going to be interesting to see how they do set up over the course of this season. Obviously, there's a long way to go for the likes of Preston and Sheffield United in this transfer window. They're going to be wanting more players to come through the door. I don't think anybody is going to have a settled squad at this stage of the season. So, obviously, if we are going to then go back to looking at Sheffield United and then making a bit of a prediction for this game, we have to then sort of talk about the problems that have been going on for Sheffield United off the pitch. Now, they've had some issues with their ownership, and that's happened with a lot of clubs recently. And you look at, there's obviously some clubs that are no longer being funded by their owners, really, and you look at some clubs who have been in administration recently. Some clubs have taken points deductions, and hopefully here at Sheffield United they're over those problems, but we don't quite know yet. Now, they've lost some big players over this summer. I think Chris Basham went on a free transfer. John Egan's left. They've lost some big names, but they've bought in Harrison Burrows and Sam McCullum. It's going to be really interesting to see how they get on in this Sheffield United side. Are they going to stick with that back five that Chris Wilder's known for, or are they going to move into more of a back three? Obviously, Sheffield United fans, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Now, if we do go on to the midfielders, they do have some good names in that midfield, but how many of them are going to stay? Obviously, Gustavo Hamer has been seen, I believe, at Leeds. Obviously, you look at Sousa as well in midfield. Is he going to stay? Koulibaly. They've got some really good players in there, and you obviously look at the likes of Ollie Orblaster and Callum O'Hare as two players who I think could have a massive impact on this midfield. Now, if you look at their forward line, when you see this video, Will Asula may have moved on to Newcastle United for a fee believed to be in the region of £15 million, and that's a deal that, as a Derby fan, I just can't quite understand how they've got that much money. Don't get me wrong, when he was at Derby, he was okay, but he was no better than okay, and it's going to be sort of interesting to see how he gets on his move. But if you do look at the forwards they have left, Louis Marsh, Rhian Brewster and Kiefer Moore, and Kiefer Moore's a stalwart at this level, absolute brilliant striker for championship level. Rhian Brewster, can you really say the same? I don't think you can. And Louis Marsh, have we seen enough? Do we know enough about Louis Marsh to be able to make a proper informed decision on whether he's going to help this team? Who knows at this moment in time. Now, if we do go back to the main fixture page, I'm predicting that for this game, I think it's going to be a 2-0 Sheffield United win. I think they're just going to come out on top. I think Kiefer Moore is going to bag a brace. It's going to be really interesting to see that game. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to watch every game, but I will have full match reviews out on Tuesday after, obviously, all the fixtures are played out on Monday night. Now, on to the third game of the weekend, and we're starting off now with the Saturday fixtures. Cardiff City face Sunderland at the Cardiff City Stadium. Now, this one is going to be a very interesting one. I believe Cardiff City have sort of been in a bit of a position where, in a bit of nothingness over this off-season. Obviously, they had their issues with management, who was going to be the manager and stuff like that. They've obviously lost some big players. They've brought in some new players. Sunderland sort of in a circumstance where they're rebuilding, but are they rebuilding? Because they've got a lot of youth and potential. They've brought in some good names as well, have Sunderland, and I think this game's going to be a very interesting one. And I do think Sunderland are going to be in a really good position this season. But shall we take a look at both sides' recent form? Now, obviously, if we look at all the games in perspective for pre-season, Cardiff City haven't lost in the 5 listed. Sunderland have. Cardiff City have beat Bristol Rovers, Reading and Hamburg SV. But they've also drew to Hertha BC and Mamelodi Sundowns, whoever they are. That's going to be a very interesting one. Now, Sunderland, They've drew with Nottingham Forest. They've beat Udinese. They've beat Blackpool, drew with Marseille and lost to Bradford City. It's going to be a fairly interesting one, this one, for Sunderland. Now, obviously, as it stands right now, they've kept hold of Jobe Bellingham. They've brought in Alan Brown from Preston. I think they've got a fairly decent squad that's just going to grow and grow and grow here at Sunderland. And the big question is going to be, how long can they keep these players? Because there's only so often that you can have these young players that perform to a decent level and be able to keep them for the next season. And that's something which I think Sunderland are going to struggle with. Now, Cardiff City, they're going to be an interesting one. They need some attacking prowess. They need some creativity. But where is it going to come from? Now, if we do go on to look at both squads, obviously I believe all games on the opening weekend are available on Sky Sports. If we do go ahead and look at Cardiff City's squad, obviously they've still got Buller in as their coach. They've brought in Callum Chambers. They've kept hold of Perry Ng. Mark McGuinness, I believe, is under interest from a couple of Premier League clubs and top-end Championship clubs, so he might not be there by the end of the transfer window. Now, if we go into midfield, they've obviously got some big names in that midfield with Aaron Ramsey, Ryan Wintle, Callum Robinson. They've got some big names in that midfield who can have massive impact on a Championship season. Now, if we look at the forwards, they've brought in Anwar El Ghazi, who I think is a really good player at Championship level. Keon Atete, a player who's from my local area. I think he's about due a proper breakout Championship season. They've brought in Chris Willock, who I think is going to be a very interesting signing. Obviously, I don't think they're the finished article yet. I think they need a few more players in this strike force. Obviously, you look at the midfield and it's stacked, but I don't think they have enough quality in there at the moment. And obviously, you look at the defenders, they've got some really good players at the back, but it is going to be interesting to see how that obviously develops over the course of the season. And it's one of those for me where Cardiff City are sort of in a bit of no man's land, where if they can't get their act together, they could end up in that relegation scrap. And it's going to be a very interesting one to watch on Saturday morning. Obviously, it's all kicks off this weekend with the Championship, with League One. It's going to be very interesting to see how all the teams do get on. Obviously, if you're interested in League One as well, I'll have my League One Game Week 1 review out as well, so make sure you go and check that out. Obviously, you look at Sunderland, Anthony Patterson, brilliant goalkeeper. You look at some of the players in their back four. I think they're in a really good place for the future, not just for now, with some of the players they've got, because they do have some really nice players. You go on into midfield, I think bringing in Ian Poveda is a really good signing. Keeping hold of Jobe Bellingham is going to be really good. Alan Brown is going to be an interesting signing as well. Now, Elliot Embleton, if he gets fit, he could have a really good season, but he hasn't been fit for, I believe, the last 2 seasons, so can't see that happening. You obviously can't go through Sunderland without mentioning Chris Rigg, a very talented youngster. It's going to be interesting to see how many minutes he gets this season. It's going to be very interesting to see how that does go for him. You obviously look at then the forward line, and you look at Jack Clark, who I think isn't going to be here come the end of the transfer window. You look at Patrick Roberts, 2 very impressive seasons last year. Abdullah Barr as well. It's going to be very interesting to see how this Sunderland side do get on. Now, if we do go back to the main fixture page, I'm going to predict that I think this one is going to be a 3-0 Sunderland win. I just think Sunderland are going to be able to edge it versus Cardiff City. And I think they're going to start off the season in the right way. I think Cardiff City aren't. And I think Cardiff City are going to really struggle this upcoming season. Now, this is a game that I'm seriously very interested in. Hull City face Bristol City at the MKM Stadium. Now, Hull City have gone through a whole host of changes this off-season, losing some big players like Jadon Phalange and Greaves, one of the best defenders in the Championship last season. You also look at some of the players Bristol City have bought in over the course of this off-season. It's going to be very interesting to see how this one does go. Hull City obviously have a lot of work to do on their squad to replace some of the names they've lost. But shall we take a look at the pre-season for both sides? Now, Hull lost 5-1 to Fenerbahce, 4-0 to Doncaster, 2-0 to Newcastle. They drew 2-2 with Fiorentina and lost 2-0 to Reading. Not quite the start that Hull City were wanting to their pre-season. Not quite the start that Hull City were wanting in pre-season. And Bristol City certainly are on the different end of that scale. They beat Aldershot 2-0, beat Cheltenham Town 3-0. They beat Exeter City 2-1, and drew with Willem. 0-0. It's going to be interesting to see how this one shakes up. Obviously, Bristol City have newly appointed Jason Knight as their club captain. That's going to be an interesting one to see. Bristol City have recently announced that Jason Knight will be club captain. It's going to be interesting to see how such a young head deals with that. Obviously, he held the captaincy at points during his time at Derby County, although I believe that was mainly just to increase his value. Now, if we do look at both sides, Hull City have sort of been a team in transition over this off-season, and Bristol City, not so much. They've been a team who have been sort of punching to sort of get it right this year. And obviously, you look at when they bought in Liam Manning last season, didn't get a proper off-season to get his players into shape. So this is going to be really interesting to see how it develops for Liam Manning at Bristol City. Now, if we go on to look at Hull City's squad first, that's going to be the interesting one that we need to look at. Obviously, they've got Tim Walter as their manager now. If we do look, obviously, they bought in Ryan Giles permanently. Now, I heard rumours that he was potentially going straight back out on a transfer to Middlesbrough, but that doesn't seem to have progressed or happened yet. Although, who knows, it could still happen. There's still 2 weeks left of the transfer window as I'm recording this. We go into the midfield and they have some really, really good players in there. Obviously, the likes of Ryan Longman has had lots of other championship clubs interested in it. It would be interesting to see how he gets on staying at Hull City, if that is what ends up happening. And if you look at the forwards, like, they've lost some big names. I believe Aaron Connolly is left on a free transfer. Some of these are not quite updated yet. So it's going to be interesting to see how it does go on for, obviously, Hull City and for Bristol City. Both clubs are still sort of trying to piece things together. Obviously, Hull City getting rid of Liam Rossigna at the back end of last season. Rossigna, who's now joined a French club, I believe, as coach, where Patrick Vieira used to be in, if I'm remembering correctly. Now, obviously, Liam Rossigna didn't quite hit the target set by the ownership, which was promotion. It was playoffs. But I don't think he did too badly. Now, if we get on to Bristol City, Liam Manning took over last year and didn't quite sort of hit the heights as expected early on, but he got there in the end. Now, if we look at the defenders, they have some really, really good players in here with the likes of Rob Dickey and Hayden Roberts, two players who I think are really, really good. Now, I don't think Hayden Roberts quite got the minutes he deserved last season, but hopefully that's something that can change going on into this campaign. Now, if we do look onto the midfielders, now, any Derby County fan is going to look at this midfield and be absolutely devastated. Bristol City have essentially become a, parent club, let's say. They've brought in Jason Knight and Max Bird. Jason Knight obviously signed at the back end of the first transfer window last summer, and Max Bird joined in January but then came back on loan to us to make sure we got promotion. Now, they're going to be two very, very good players. It's going to be interesting to see how this midfield lines up at Bristol City, because obviously Max Bird is a technically gifted footballer who gets on the ball, likes to make things happen. But obviously under Paul Warne, you wasn't able to see that happen as much with Derby County. He was pushed further forward. So it's going to be interesting to see where he is put in this Bristol City side. We then obviously go forward to the forwards. Obviously, there's the big dispute with Tommy Conway. He looks as if he's going to be heading his way out for around £5 million. They've bought in Sinclair Armstrong for about £3.5 million. It's going to be interesting to see how this one does develop over the course of the season. And obviously, they do have some good players at both clubs. And I personally think that it's going to be a draw, this game. I think it's going to be a 1-1 draw between Hull City and Bristol City. You let me know your thoughts and predictions down in the comment section. If you have not done so already and you've got to this point of the video, you might as well hit that subscribe button down below and ding dong that notification bell. Make sure you smash the like button as well to let me know you're enjoying this video. Let me know your thoughts and predictions for Game Week 1 down in the comments. We will be back with a Game Week 1 review after all the games have been played. So make sure you stay tuned for that one to come out, and I'll make sure to let you know when it is dropping. Unfortunately, Leeds United were unable to get promoted in the playoff final at Wembley last season, but Portsmouth went one step further in League One and became champions of the division. This one is going to be really, really interesting. Leeds have lost some big names, but they've also brought in some really, really good players. Pompey sort of seems to be teetering on the edge of bringing in some good players, but not quite yet. It's going to be really interesting to see how John Messineo gets on in the Championship with Pompey. It's also going to be interesting to see if Daniel Farke ends this season as Leeds United manager. Now, we only have 2 pre-season fixtures on FOTMob listed for both these sides, with Harrogate Town losing 3-0 to Leeds United and Valencia also taking a 2-1 defeat to Leeds United. Now, if we go over to Portsmouth's, they've had a 1-1 draw with MK Dons and they've beaten Gosport Borough 3-1. Now, this game for me is going to be so interesting because it's literally the tale of 2 teams, because you've got Leeds United with parachute payments and all this money they've just brought in. I believe it's around like 30-40 million pounds for Somerville, and then you've got Pompey, who are sort of working on a budget still and unable to sort of potentially match a fee offered by Cardiff City for a player they were interested in. So it's going to be very interesting looking into this one. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to Leeds. Obviously, are they going to still be heartbroken from that back end of the season, the loss that they had to Southampton in the playoff final? Obviously, Ilham Melier is an absolutely wonderful goalkeeper at this level, and in my opinion should be playing much higher. Will he still be at Leeds United come the end of the transfer window? Who actually knows? Now, if we look at the defenders, they've got some really good ones in there. Bringing in Joe Rodon on a permanent deal, as well as Jayden Bogle. They're 2 very good players, in my opinion, who certainly fit what Daniel Farke is trying to do. Obviously, Rodon was there last season. Bogle coming in from Sheffield United. You also look at the likes of Junior Firpo and Sam Byram, who, in my opinion, are 2 still very good defenders. Now, if we go on into the midfield, they've got some really good players in there as well, with the likes of Ethan Ampadu, Joe Rothwell, Brendan Aronson, like Joel Peru, who I think is more of a number 9 than a midfielder, but they've got some really good players in there. And if we do then go ahead and take a look at the forwards, obviously you look at the likes of Mateo Joseph, you look at Patrick Bamford, Dan James, who in my opinion is a Premier League player, Ruta, Nonto could still be heading out. Ruta could head out. Any of these players at Leeds United could head out. But it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. Obviously, Joe Goldhart, is he going to get more of an opportunity this season for Leeds United? It's going to be an interesting one to see how it goes. Obviously, you look at Patrick Bamford and some of the things he's done in his career. Are Leeds still going to use him? Are they still going to utilise him? That's a big question I've got for this upcoming campaign. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty around Daniel Farke. Some people don't know how he kept his job after the playoff final. Some people think that he didn't do badly. But for me, I think Leeds United have got to be aiming for that top step this season, and I do think that they'll get it in the end. Obviously, if we then go ahead to look at obviously Portsmouth, and we look at the squad that John Messineo has available to him, and it certainly isn't anywhere near the quality that Leeds United have on offer. So they're going to have to be very defensively solid. Like, you look at the defenders they have, Conor Shaughnessy, you look at obviously Jack Swanson. Like, they do have some good players in there, but like Jordan Williams, they've bought him from Barnsley. They're certainly not picking from the same part as Leeds United when it comes to signings. We obviously then go on to their midfield, and you look at Marlon Pack. He's going to be a very interesting one this season. I believe he's 35 years old now. It's going to be interesting to see how Owen Moxon develops into this season. Where is Callum Lang's best position for Portsmouth? Is he going to be able to sort of find a best position for Portsmouth? Obviously, a very good player last season when he was available for Portsmouth. Obviously came in from Wigan. We obviously then go on to the forwards, and they've brought in Josh Murphy from Oxford United, which I think for them is going to be a decent signing. You obviously look at Elias Sorensen, Samuel Silvera, 2 players who I think can have a massive impact this season. Now, we can't talk about Portsmouth without talking about the unfortunate situation with Colby Bishop. During routine heart screening this off-season, they found that he has a heart condition which needed immediate surgery. So I don't think he'll play before Christmas probably. If he plays before Christmas, I'll be very, very intrigued. But obviously, I hope he gets better soon. Obviously, hope the operation and all that goes well. Now, Gavin White and Anthony Scully look like they could be sort of heading out. But will they head out? It's going to be interesting to see. I think John Mousinho is a very good manager, in my opinion. I think he did really, really well last season. I think it was his first full campaign as a senior manager. So I think that they're in a good place. I do think they're going to be in that relegation scrap, but it's going to be interesting to see how that one does go. And unfortunately for Pompey fans, I am going to have to predict that Leeds United win this one. I think it's going to be a 2-0 Leeds United win. It's going to be very interesting to see how it does go. Let me know your predictions down in the comments. Middlesbrough face Swansea at the Riverside in the next fixture of the weekend. There's obviously quite a few happening on Saturday. There's a couple on Friday, one on Sunday and one on Monday. And this is one of the ones in the middle of the Saturday group of fixtures. Now, this is going to be an interesting one because I think Middlesbrough are quite a hit and miss team depending on how their previous season went. And I was talking to a Middlesbrough fan in the comments of, I believe it was the predictions video, and he sort of said that if he thinks that this season will be a hit season because he thinks last season was a miss. So it's going to be interesting to obviously see how that one does go. Obviously Swansea City, sort of under new management, they've made a few changes to their style of play and things like that. And it's one of those where they've let go of some players they've spent some big money on and they've not retained any money, if that makes sense. They've sort of let them go on loan. And it's going to be interesting to see how obviously that develops. And if we do look at the pre-season games, obviously Middlesbrough have beat Bolton 3-0. They've won 1-0 versus Gateshead, 5-3 versus Doncaster Rovers, a 0-0 draw with Harrogate, and a 1-0 win against SC Heerenveen. We'll go with that. And Swansea City, I believe there's only 3 listed here. They've lost 2-1 to Cologne, 1-1 with FK Vader Skopje. And they've won 3-0 against Rio Ave, which I believe is a Portuguese side. So that's an interesting one. A fairly decent tour for you Swansea fans, if obviously those games were away. Obviously the Cologne one and Vader Skopje one was. So it's going to be an interesting one. Now, Middlesbrough have a really good coach, a coach I really, really like in Michael Carrick. And I really like their goalkeeper, Seny Dieng, and they've brought in Luke Ayling on a permanent transfer. Obviously, I believe he was on loan there last season. Matt Clark, in my opinion, is a really, really good defender. We had him at Derby County a few years ago. He's not necessarily your nice and cute defender, but he certainly has a role to play. Now, obviously, if we then go on to look into the midfield, they've got some really good players in there like Finn Azaz, Hayden Hackney, and Daniel Barlaser. 3 really, really good players that Middlesbrough have available to them. And then if we look at their forwards, what more can you say? Isaiah Jones, brilliant, brilliant player in my opinion. Emmanuel Latter, he could be good. Josh Coburn could be good if given opportunities. And it's going to be interesting to see how, obviously, Carrick sets up this season. I believe they've lost Cameron Archer. I believe he's gone back to Aston Villa on a buyback clause, which is obviously going to be interesting for him and obviously interesting for Middlesbrough to sort of find a way around that in their attacking elements. Now, if we go on to Swansea City and look at their squad, they've obviously got Luke Williams in charge, took over after leaving Notts County during last season. And I think they're in a fairly decent place. They've got some really good defenders. I think Josh Tymon's really good. I really like Harry Darling. And I just think they've got some good players in there. Josh Key, fairly decent. Ben Cabango, another player who I think is really, really good at championship level. You look at the midfield, obviously, Joe Allen, Jamie Patterson, getting towards the back end of their career, but you can't ignore the influence that Matt Grimes has on every team that he's played in. And it's going to be interesting to see, obviously, how that one does develop. They've obviously let Jerry Yates, a £2.5 million signing, move on loan to Derby County, so it's going to be interesting to see how that one goes. We do look at their forwards though. They do have obviously Liam Cullen, Sam Parker. They've got some players who can sort of fill that role. I still think they're going to be looking for more. Obviously, Swansea fans, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Now, if we do then go back to the main fixture page and sort of put a prediction on this game. I think it's going to be a 2-2 draw. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting one, and you can obviously let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. Well, Millwall versus Watford is the next game we're going to talk about, and it's going to be very interesting to see how this one plays out. Obviously, both sides sort of having their own problems in their own ways over this off-season. Obviously, the sad passing of Millwall's goalkeeper, not something which I'm going to touch on too much because I don't know enough details about it to really say anything. Obviously, condolences to friends, family, and Millwall as a whole. And then Watford, obviously, completely different type of issues with their ownership and things like that. And are their owners focusing on Udinese, or are they focusing on Watford? And it's just one of those things where I don't think Watford are ever going to be happy with the way they're ran. But if we do look at Millwall's most recent pre-season results, we're going to go from the Gillingham game, because I believe that Swansea was their last game of this season, and they drew 0-0 with Gillingham, lost 2-1 to Nottingham Forest, beat Real Murcia 2-1 and lost 1-0 to Southampton. Watford, on the other hand, drew 1-1 with Brentford, lost 3-2 to Wycombe Wanderers, won 3-2 against Hibernian, a 2-0 loss versus Gillingham, and a 2-2 draw with Stevenage. Now, both of these sides have been through their own troubles in their own ways over the course of this off-season, and it's going to be really interesting to see how both sets of players are able to get up for it. Now, if we do look at the squad at Millwall, they've brought in Liam Roberts, they've brought in Lucas Jensen as goalkeepers. Lucas Jensen, one of the best goalkeepers in League One last season, only second to that of Joe Wildsmith. Now, I think Neil Harris has got a job in his hands here, and I think Millwall could struggle. But I also think that they're one of those teams that also have the ability to get into the playoffs if they put their mind to it and if they show what they're capable of. You should obviously look at the signing of Tanganga. I think is an incredible signing. You also then go ahead to look at their midfielders, and they do have some good players in there. They just need a bit more quality in the attacking areas, and that's something that they've looked to improve on with the signing of Macaulay Langstaff. But does he fit the system Neil Harris plays and Millwall play? That is going to be sort of the big question over this season. I do think Millwall are going to be in a really good place this year. I can't quite remember where I put them in my predictions video, but I'm pretty sure it was in a fairly decent place. Now, you can obviously let me know your predictions for the game down in the comment section. If you want to, you can go through all the games through the video and then put your obviously predictions down below if that's what you want to do. Obviously, you don't have to. So, yeah, you can put your predictions in if you want to. If we then go on to looking at the squad of Watford, now it's going to be interesting with Tom Cleverley. Obviously, did an okay job towards the back end of last season, but is he going to be used as a scapegoat if things don't go well this year? Obviously, with the inexperience, they've got some good players at Watford, and they've obviously brought back Moussa Sissoko, but he's 34 years old now. He's not the player he once was. They do have some really good players in this squad. Obviously, you look at Ken Sema, you look at Tom Ince, like good championship players. Now, Tom Ince coming to the back end of his career now, but still has the ability to have an output. And I think it's difficult to really talk about a lot of games this week because we don't know how sides are going to line up. We can't look at previous games and previous form to sort of predict what's going to happen, and it is going to be a really interesting one. It's going to be one for you all to keep note of. I personally think this game is going to end a 0-0 draw. I think both sides are just going to lack that bit of quality in the final third. Obviously, as I've previously mentioned, you can let me know your thoughts down in the comments, or wait till the video's done and then let me know your thoughts. But I'd love to hear your predictions and thoughts about game week 1. In the next game we're looking into is Oxford United versus Norwich City. It's going to be very interesting to see how this one goes. Obviously, Oxford United came up and they weren't even the third best team in League One. They had a real big slump towards the back end of the season and even in mid-season, and ended up finishing 6th but came up through the playoff positions. Now, I think Oxford United could be in trouble this year. They've made some good signings though, and it is going to be interesting to see how that develops. Obviously, Norwich City fell short in the playoffs So it's going to be interesting to see how it all does develop. Now, obviously, if we look at the fixtures for both sides throughout pre-season, and Norwich City do not look in a good place. 3 losses and 2 draws of the listed games. Oxford United, 3 wins and 2 losses. Now, obviously, no one wants to lose in pre-season, and it's difficult to see how you can look good when you've not won a game in pre-season on the previous 5. So, obviously, Norwich may have played other pre-season friendlies. I'm only talking about what we can see and what we know from FootMob. But Oxford United they've got a good manager in Des Buckingham. I do like Des Buckingham. But I just think he didn't have the time last year, obviously, to implement what he wanted. And it's going to be interesting to see how, obviously, that goes this year. Now, if we look at the defenders, they've brought in some really, really good ones, like Peter Kioso, who I think is really, really good. You've got Louis Sibley, who's noted down as a defender here because of his playing position for Derby County last season. But I think he'll be in that midfield area. They've kept Cameron Brannigan. I believe he's signed a new contract. They've brought in Idris El Mizouni, who I think is an incredible talent for any club to be able to pick up. They've also brought in Will Vaulks to add to that experience in midfield. And if you then obviously go to their strike force, I do still think they're lacking in that strike area. But they've brought in Malcolm Ebiowei, they've brought in Plaqueta as well, 2 players who can impact that forward line. And it's going to be interesting to obviously see how this Oxford side does line up, because obviously Des Buckingham has his style, and it didn't particularly work in League One last season. And I am going to be sort of very interested to see how it does go for him this season. I am going to be very interested to see how it does go for him this season, because there's obviously a lot that they need to work on, and obviously they need to be more consistent. If you get in, I think they ended up on 77 points in League One last year. And when you think some of the champions of League One have then come straight back down, it doesn't sort of bode well for Oxford United. Now, obviously, we then go on to look at Norwich City, who I think are in a bit of a good place, but not the best place. Now, they've obviously changed manager during the off-season. And if we do look at the defenders, they've got some good players in there like Shane Duffy, Grant Hanley, Jack Stacey. Some players who I think are real impactful defenders. They've obviously got Sorensen now as well. And if we then go to look into the midfield area, they are looking a bit lacking in that area now. I'm sure that Norwich fans will tell me that they're all right. They're quite fine in that area. Like Nunez, I think, is a good player. Ashley Barnes, is he still up to the levels that he used to be? Maybe not. Now, obviously, you look at the forwards and you look at Jonathan Rowe, looks to be on his way out. Josh Sargent, really, really good player. Obviously, you then look at like a name like Tony Springett. He certainly isn't ready for Championship football, but will he get it due to limited numbers? Who knows? So, for me, it's going to be a really interesting one, and I'm actually going to go with a bit of a surprise prediction for this one. I actually think Oxford are going to win this game. I think they're going to win 1-0. I think it's going to be a tough game for Norwich City. You look at the masterclass that Des Buckingham put on versus Bolton Wanderers in that playoff final, and it was absolutely tremendous what they did to Bolton that day. So I personally think it's going to be a 1-0 Oxford win. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. And here we have the next game. There's 4 left, including this one. QPR face West Bromwich Albion. Now, this could be a really, really interesting one. QPR seem to think that they found the formula, and West Brom are sort of in a bit of turmoil after finding out that they are going to be under a transfer embargo. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one gets on at Loftus Road. Now, I have no idea where the pre-season friendlies start. The only ones that I know will be pre-season friendlies for sure is Tottenham Hotspur and Brighton and Hove Albion. 2 losses for QPR does not look good. Now, I don't know if those other games, the Cov, Leeds and Preston one, I believe they're probably all Championship fixtures. So if we then go to look on to West Brom, if we go from the Blackpool game, they've lost 4 games in pre-season. It is not looking good for them. Now, obviously you look at QPR and you look at obviously their manager in Marty Cifuentes, and they think they've found the formula. They've got some fairly decent players as well. I think Jake Clark-Slater is really good. I really like Liam Morrison and Jimmy Dunn. Now, I could be wrong. You QPR fans could tell me that they're absolutely awful players, but we obviously then go into the midfield, and they do have some good players in there. And the big question is going to be for QPR is, can they keep up the form they ended with last season? Because that's something that a lot of teams struggle with. They hit form towards the back end of a campaign and then just can't hit that form again. Now, obviously, they've got Elias Chair, Paul Smythe, Lyndon Dykes. They've got some really, really good players who can really impact in the Championship. Obviously, some players who may still move on, some players who may still return to the club as well on transfer deals. So, obviously, if we then go to take a look at West Bromwich Albion and we look at, obviously, the squad that Carlos Corberán has to work with now. They've picked off Joe Wildsmith from Derby County after his really, really impressive League One campaign. Now, is he going to be a first choice? I don't know. I think he could eventually be their first choice, but I think they'll stick with what they know for now. You obviously look at that sort of defensive area. You look at Sami Ajayi, you look at Kyle Bartley, Darnell Furlong, some really, really, really good players in that Championship level, in my opinion. Obviously, then look at the midfield. They've got Diakate, John Swift, Alex Mowat, Jason Malumbi, who I think he's the player who punched someone in pre-season, but it will be interesting to see how, obviously, West Brom get on this year. Grady Dean Garner as well, very impressive player during periods of his career. Now, you obviously look at Jed Wallace, Devante Colan, who's signing, Daryl DK, if he can stay fit, he's a problem for anybody. Same with Carlon Grant. And if we do obviously go back to the main fixture page, I think this is going to be a very, very interesting one for both teams, because I think both teams could be in and around that sort of playoff area towards the end of the season. I also think that there's also a world where it goes completely wrong for both teams. Now, obviously, West Brom can't really add players anymore due to their embargo that they've been put under by the EFL. QPR is still in a position where they can bring people in. Now, I predict for this game, I think West Brom are going to start the season on a high. I think it's going to be a 2-1 win versus QPR. Probably a really, really late goal. Obviously, let me know your predictions down below. Stoke City versus Coventry. Now, Stoke City have had their problems in the past, as have Coventry City, but I think both clubs are sort of turning the tables now. Now, Stoke City obviously have, I think Stephen Schumacher is at the wheel there, and obviously you've got Mark Robbins at Coventry. Schumacher went to Stoke after a spell with Plymouth Argyle, where he did really, really well. You obviously look at Coventry, and they've had Mark Robbins for God knows how long. And if we do look at the pre-season fixtures for both sides, Stoke have been in some really impressive form. 5-0 versus Cork, 2-1 versus Crewe Alexandra. They lost 1-0 versus Stockport, a 1-0 win versus Bolton, and a 1-0 loss to AZ Alkmaar. You then look at Coventry City, a 0-0 draw with Getafe, 3-1 win versus Stevenage, a 2-0 loss to Darmstadt, a 3-0 win versus Everton, and a 2-1 loss to Werder Bremen. And I think both of these clubs are in really, really good positions. I'm pretty sure that I've got Coventry City as one of my playoff contenders in my predictions video. You can obviously go and check that one out. Now, if we do go and look at Stoke City's squad, and I do think they have some good players in here. Obviously, I think Victor Johansson is a really, really smart, impressive deal for Stoke City to work with. You obviously look in the midfield, in the defence, and they've got Ender Stevens, Ben Gibson, Lyndon Gooch, all players who I think are good at this level. They've obviously got Eric Bobcat as well, who I think is going to be a really, really good player this season. And if we go into the midfield area, they've obviously got Daniel Johnson, who I think is a really, really good player. You've obviously got Ben Pearson, well known for his yellows and red cards that he's picked up over the years. Lewis Baker and Josh Lauren are very, very good players, but will they still be at the club come at the end of the transfer window? That is the big question for a lot of these clubs right now. And if we do go onto the forwards and you look at, they've bought in Sam Gallagher, they've bought in Wesley, Niall Ennis, they've got some really, really good talent in this squad. Obviously, Emre Tezgel coming up from their academy setup. So it's going to be interesting to see how this obviously does develop. over the course of the season, and obviously over the course of this transfer window as well, because they can still obviously bring players in. Now, I quite like Steven Schumacher as a manager. I think he did really, really well with Plymouth Argyle. I think he did okay last season with Stoke, but I think he's got a long, long way to go before he's sort of like set in stone as a decent Championship manager. Now, you can obviously let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if we then do obviously go on to looking at Coventry City, I think Mark Robins has cemented himself as one of the best Championship managers about. I think he's done really well with this squad at Coventry, obviously losing some big players over the years as well. You look at the players that they've got, the likes of Jake Bidwell, Jada Silva, Joel Aboutier. Like, they've got some really, really good players. You obviously go into the midfield and they've brought in Rafael Rodriguez, a player who I'm surprised hasn't gone to Portsmouth with the Australian links they have. You obviously look at Jack Rudani as well, who's a big signing from Huddersfield Town. They've still got Ben Sheaf as well. It's obviously going to be interesting to see how they obviously go. You've obviously now got Brandon Thomas Asante, who's come in. You've got Epsom Mason Clark, who's now arrived after his the end of his spell with Peterborough United. And it's going to be interesting to see how obviously these teams develop. Obviously, as the season goes on, these preview videos will get more into about form and recent performances. But right now, we can only talk about the squads. And I'm predicting that this game, I think it's going to be a 1-1 draw. I think both teams are going to sort of shut each other down. I think it's going to be a really interesting game, though. I do think there's a world where Coventry can take it, but I do think that it's going to be a 1-1 draw. Sheffield Wednesday and Plymouth Argyle are the next game on the list. Now, Plymouth Argyle have caused a bit of a stir, bringing in Wayne Rooney as their new manager for the upcoming season, and it's going to be really interesting to see how that one does develop. So far, they've also kept hold of Morgan Whittaker. That looks to be an excellent hold if they can keep him till obviously the end of the transfer window. Sheffield Wednesday are under their first campaign, full campaign with Danny Roll. They've obviously given him a new contract after his impressive display as gaffer towards the back end of last season. Now, if we do obviously go ahead to look at the pre-season results, obviously I can only count two for Sheffield Wednesday, with a 4-0 loss to Salzburg and a 0-0 draw to Leganes, but I believe they will have obviously played more. Now, you look at Plymouth Argyle, it's pretty similar. There's only two that you can really go off, and I think the 5-1 win versus Cheltenham Town and a 2-1 loss to Bristol Rovers isn't really much to discuss. Obviously, you don't want to be losing games at any point during the season, especially not pre-season. Now, if we look at the squad that Sheffield Wednesday have, and I'm not a fan of Ben Hamer, but who knows? Their choice. I do think they're in a fairly decent position. They've got some really good players. Obviously, you look at the defensive area, you've got Deshaun Bernard, who's signed a new contract, I believe, Michael Ihekwe, Dominic Iorfa, some really, really good players. You obviously go into the midfield where they've brought in Nathaniel Chalobah and Savante Ingleson. Obviously, Max Lowe's coming as well after leaving Sheffield United. They've still got hold of Josh Windass and Barry Bannon as well. So that's a very, very impressive midfield area. You obviously look at the forward area as well. They've brought in Olaf Kobatsky. They've brought in I don't know if Malik Wilkes was there before, but they've brought in Charlie McNeil, they've brought in Jamal Lowe. They're in a really, really good place, and they are currently supposedly in the battle with Derby County and Birmingham City for Karamoko Dembele. So it's going to be interesting to see how obviously that develops over the course of this transfer window. A very, very impressive player in League One last season. Now, I think Danny Roll will keep these safe quite easily, if I'm completely honest. Now, if you go and check out my predictions video, it should be a few days ago, so make sure you check that one out. Now, if we go on to Plymouth Argyle, now Wayne Rooney going to Plymouth Argyle is a very, very interesting one. I think he could do really well there. Less pressure and impetus on being in the playoffs in the top half of the league, and more on making sure you stay in the division. Now, Michael Cooper is going to be someone who's going to be spoke about for the rest of this transfer window. A very impressive goalkeeper who has a lot of interest in him, but he seems a bit out of people's price range at the moment, and that's completely fair enough. Now, if you go on to the defenders, obviously Barley Mumba, they've got some good players in that defensive area. Now, the big area to talk about really is sort of the midfield and the forward line, where they've got Adam Forshaw. They've got some really, really good players in that midfield area, and it's going to be interesting to see if they are able to keep hold of their most important player, in my opinion, which is Morgan Whittaker. Obviously, they've brought in Nathaniel Ogbeta, who is, in my opinion, a fairly decent player. Is he amazing? I don't think so. They've obviously brought in Sissoko and Tijani as well during this off-season. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one goes. Now, I can see Wayne Rooney doing a good job. Will he keep them up? I'm not entirely sure. But I personally think that this isn't going to get off to a great start for Sheffield Wednesday. I think Rooney is going to have an impressive first game. I think they're going to win 2-0 Plymouth Argyle. I think it's going to be a 2-0 win. And on to the final game of game week 1 in the Championship. It is two relegated sides, Burnley and Luton Town, going head-to-head with each other on Monday Night Football, essentially, as Luton Town face Burnley at Kenilworth Road in an 8 o'clock kickoff on the 12th of August. It's going to be a really, really interesting one. Now, I think Rob Edwards did a really, really good job with Luton Town last season, and I think Scott Parker is going to do an equally excellent job with Burnley this season. But I believe both of these sides are going to be in that automatic promotion hunt, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see where both sides end up. Now, if we do obviously look at the pre-seasons for both sides, neither of them look great. Now, realistically, how many of Burnley's games there are pre-season, I'm not entirely sure. Obviously, they may have played Premier League clubs in their pre-season, but I can't say that for sure. Now, Luton Town's looks like 3 losses and a draw, which doesn't look great for them, to be completely honest. But when you go on to Luton Town and you look at their squad, they've obviously lost Ross Barkley, but I think they easily have one of the best squads in the league. Now, if they can keep hold of Teran Mengi, who I think was really, really good for them last season, I think they could be in a really, really good place. And obviously, if you go onto the midfield, like, it is just so, so good. There's so many players that, like, I'd scream for at Derby County, because we're missing so much in that midfield department. It's going to be interesting to see what they do with some of these players. Obviously, I believe a couple of them are out injured at the moment, so obviously that's going to be interesting to see how they line up on Monday. Obviously, Chandon Baptiste is a new signing that they've brought in. I think he could be really, really impressive. And obviously, we go to the forwards and you look at some of the players they've got, if they keep hold of Joe Taylor and John McAtee as well, what an impressive forward line they have. It's going to be really interesting to see how Rob Edwards sets up for this Championship campaign, because they are going to be one of the better sides this year. Now, if we do then go ahead to look at, obviously, the Burnley squad. Now, Scott Parker, for me, is a bit of a Championship promotion expert. They've lost one of their main keepers, but they've brought in Hildraki from Ipswich Town on a free transfer. They still have James Trafford. Now, if we look at their defensive areas, now, I think again, similar to Luton Town, it's one of the best squads in the league. You look at the likes of Scotty Twine, Goodmanson. You look at Sander Berge, who is still there at the moment. I believe there is interest from Manchester United. Obviously Noah Masengo as well, a really, really impressive player. You obviously go to that forward line and you look at the likes of Jay Rodriguez, Manuel Benson, Michael Obafemi. They have some really, really good players who I think, in my opinion, the 3 that came down should be in the fight to go up. Now, I think Sheffield United are probably more on the back foot compared to the other few, but I think that sort of top 4 area is going to be your likes of Leeds, Luton, Burnley. They're the ones who I think are going to certainly be up there. It's going to be interesting to see, obviously, how this one obviously develops over the course of the season. Obviously, the transfer window is still ongoing and there's still like 3 weeks of that to go. So it could be interesting to see how these squads do obviously close out once the transfer window is closed. I'll probably do a squad roundup video over the international break once the transfer window is closed. Let me know down in the comments if that's something you want to see. But I do think that this game is going to be very, very interesting. I think Luton Town and Burnley, I think they could shut each other down, in complete honesty. I personally think it will be a score draw, but what score, I don't know. I think Luton Town are very, very good. I think they've got some really, really good attackers, and I think Burnley the same, having really good players in certain areas that could really impact a game. So I'm actually going to say a 2-2 draw here. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they start the campaign. Obviously, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. Now, that is my Game Week 1 preview. We'll be back for Game Week 2 to preview as well. Obviously, we'll have a Game Week 1 review out once all the games are done. It will probably come out on Tuesday morning. So make sure you've hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to stay tuned. Let me know your thoughts and predictions down in that comment section. And I'll try and get back to every single one of you. Make sure you smash the like button as well to help push the video to brand new audiences. And I'll catch you in my next video. Let's go and find me on TikTok, pictured here, and Twitter, pictured here. These are the places where I'll keep you all up to date with all my upcoming videos and my thoughts and feelings around the Formula 1 and football weekend.